Welcome to Session 1, Communication. In this session, you will learn about body language and attitude, politeness, how language differs between adults and teenagers, and how we make a differentiation between direct and indirect speech. As a reminder, throughout all the online sessions, you will need pen and paper, so in case you don't have paper and pen readily available next to you, please go get it now. You can also use the blank pages at the end of your student handbook to take notes. Think for a second. What are some ways that we communicate with other people? If you think talking or the use of words or, texting one another is the only option you communicate, you are wrong. The tone of voice, body language, mimic and gesture, as well as polite and impolite behavior also go a long way when we talk about communication. In the next couple of slides, you will learn more about each one of those topics. If you look at the two pictures on the right-hand side, you see 5 people in each of those photos. Which people would you like to meet? Well, I guess you said the one in the top photo. Why is that? Well, let's start with their posture. They're all standing in a very positive and open way. They all have smiles on their faces, and they look at you as if they are interested in talking to you. Therefore, eye contact, a smile on your face, and an open posture tells a lot about what you want to say to somebody. The body language, the posture of the people in the bottom photo, they don't look like they're interested in talking to you. They don't even look like they had a good day. Keep in mind that a positive attitude, which includes all of the above, is very important when you communicate with somebody. Also, your mimic and gesture. The people in the bottom photo don't really look like they are interested in anything. They're crouched down. They look towards the floor. They look bored. Well, they even look like something isn't right with them and they don't feel well that day. Keep that in mind when you communicate with other people. Now, let's think about some of the things that you can say in the English language. English is a very polite language, so the words and expressions on this slide are things that you will hear a lot once you are abroad. People will say, "I'm sorry," or "I'm very sorry" a lot when they are really sorry, actually. If you approach a person that you have never approached before, if you need to ask a question, you will probably say, "Excuse me, can you tell me the way to the post office?" Or if you ask your host parents for permission to go somewhere, you will probably start the question with, "Hey, Mom, Dad, may I go to the movies with my friends tonight?" At the breakfast table, for example, you will also hear things like, "Would you mind handing me the butter, please?" And once, let's say your host sister handed you the butter, she will say, "There you go, you're welcome." And you will say, "Well, thank you, thanks a lot." So all of the things on here are things that you will hear a lot in the English language. When you communicate with other people, the tone of your voice can say a lot about the things that you really think at that moment in time. I'll give you an example. Let's say you ask your host mom for permission to see some of your friends on the soccer team this weekend. So most likely you will walk up to your host mom and say, "Hey mom, may I go hang out with my friends from the soccer team this weekend?" Well, what you didn't know is your family had already made plans to go see grandma and grandpa. So your host mom's answer is, "Hey dear, I'm very sorry. But next time, maybe this weekend, we're going to see the grandparents." And now here comes the essential part of this slide. How are you going to react? Let's say you're okay with your parents' decision, right? You're okay. So you can say, okay, maybe another time, or you can say, okay, that's cool. So in the tone of voice in that answer, you are still very positive. You don't mind that you can't see your friends this weekend. Your voice tells us that you are really okay with it. If you are, on the other hand, super annoyed that you can't go see your friends and instead you have to hang out with the grandparents, your answer could also sound something along okay. Well, that okay didn't sound as positive. The tone in your voice was very negative, and your host parents are most likely to pick up on that. So please be sensitive and make sure that you do not sound annoyed or withdrawn or sassy, because that is very impolite. Respect the decisions your host parents made. They usually have a very good reason for their decision, and don't argue. So this slide is about not the things that you can say, but the things that you can do to be polite. Remember what we just talked about with you going to see your grandparents? Well, let's be honest. Maybe hanging out with the grandparents is not the most fun thing in the world, and you would have much rather wanted to spend time with your friends. Well, in a difficult situation like this, also try to keep a positive attitude. Also, be sensitive for other people's needs. Maybe it is important for your host parents to go see the grandparents this weekend. So keep that in mind when you don't get the thing that you wished for, but instead you do something that your host parents wished for. When it says on here, leave people their personal space, this is something that we don't necessarily practice like that in Spain. But in Canada, you will see that, for example, in supermarkets, when people stand in line to pay, they keep a certain distance to one another because people like their personal space. They don't want the person behind them right behind them. They want to have a little bit of personal space. Obviously, and I hope you all know that, don't interrupt when other people are talking. I feel like personally, this is something that little children do at the beginning when they haven't learned yet that their opinion is not the most important one. But you guys are old enough now, so obviously, when other people are talking, please be patient and wait. The next one, don't talk back or argue. This means when your host parents made a decision, please accept it. I know that most of us were raised in a way that we like to discuss and ask questions. So instead of telling our parents, okay, let's go see the grandparents this weekend, we are more the kind of people that would say, well, but why? And it's so boring to go to the grandparents. I would much rather go see my friends this weekend. This is not fair, etc., etc. This is what we mean when we say, don't talk back or argue. Canadian parents won't like that. So here are some examples of polite behavior. Obviously, when you go into a store or a building, you can hold the doors open for other people. It is very, very common to give compliments. So, for example, even to random strangers, somebody on the bus, somebody that you see, you can say, hey, I really like your shoes. This is very, very common in the English language. Also, you can offer your help. And also, finally, don't cut in line at a store. So be patient even when the line is long. These are just some examples, and I'm sure you can come up with even more when you think about it. I know I have spoken a lot about going to Canada and the English language so far, but everything that we have thus far talked about is true for English in general. The English language is simply a very, very polite language. Now, for those of you going to Canada, you will see that Canadians themselves, not only by using the English language, but also by the way they behave, They're simply extremely polite people. They will use phrases like, I really appreciate this, or thank you, and hey, I'm so sorry that I'm late. Those are some phrases that you will hear even more going to Canada. Also, and some of you that have traveled to Canada before may notice, Canadians greet strangers as well. So if you, for example, stand in line at the grocery store to get some items, the lady at the checkout desk will probably say, "Hey, how are you today? I hope you had a great day." Or she will say, "Hi, I hope you found everything okay today." You will think, does this lady know me? But no, she doesn't. This is just the extremely polite behavior that you will encounter when going to Canada. So it is part of Canadian culture. And obviously, you going there, we ask you to adapt to this Canadian culture. So why not practice yourself before you go? It can't hurt to be polite. It can't hurt to be positive, especially not in Spain. So believing that you still have a couple of days left before you head out, go ahead and practice. Now, we would like for you to do a quick activity. You have pen and paper, so we want you to write down 3 things that come to your mind. And the question is, where does the language differ when you talk to your friends? Whereas when you talk to your own parents or parents of a friend or even other adults, we want you to think, where is the language or the use of language different? Go ahead, write down 3 things on the piece of paper, then move on to the next slide. Well, of course, language is different when you talk to adults versus you talking to people your own age. It's not only the choice of words, it's also the way we phrase things. I'm sure you wrote down exactly that on your piece of paper. So no matter what country you go to, teenagers are generally less formal when they talk to people their own age. But we will give you an example on the next slide. So let's go back and imagine that you play on your high school soccer team. After practice, one of your teammates walks up to you and says, "Man, this was a good fucking practice today. I'll see you tomorrow." Well, you feel good about this. You had a good practice. Your teammates were happy. And you come home and you want to talk to your host parents about this. So your host dad will ask you, "Well, how was practice today?" Think about it. What are you going to answer? Are you going to use the exact same words? "Man, Dad, I had a good fucking practice." Or will you possibly think about re-choosing your words, using different words, or maybe tell them in a little bit of a different way? So how does language and communication differ when we talk to adults? With adults, we don't only mean host parents, we mean older people than you in general. As I mentioned earlier, we don't like you to talk back. In Spanish, that means bad behavior. Don't argue. Don't discuss. Don't question the decisions an adult made. It is not admired by anyone because when you talk back, you are seen as a smartass. No one likes smartasses. Respect and be polite, that is a sign of maturity. This is a sign that you're old enough and that you are accepting other people's decisions. We do understand that communicating in a foreign language isn't always easy. So, needless to say, there can be difficult situations ahead of you. One of them is, for example, that you feel misunderstood. Something you said, you didn't even mean it that way. Well, here's what you can do about it. Tell people politely, explain yourself, but be polite about it. Another example that happens often is, for example, at school. If a teacher asks you to stop talking during class, I feel like over here, most of the time, you guys would say something, but I was just doing this, or I was just asking for that. It's almost like you have an excuse ready for when the teacher asks you. It is much better to simply say, "I'm sorry," and be quiet. If you don't understand what people ask you, ask them politely. Tell them politely that you didn't understand. Ask them to please repeat or to explain what they said. It's that simple. So here's a little secret about the different way of communication in the English language. Earlier, I mentioned that there's a difference between indirect and direct speech. No, we're not talking about grammar, and we're not in English class right now. We're simply talking about the message people are sending. For example, if your host parents say something along the lines of, "I had a hard time getting through the hallway today," well, is that all they're trying to tell you? Or what they really want to say is, "Put your shoes away because they're standing in the middle of the room." Or here's another example. If people tell you, "Hey, your room looks a little messy," well, it's not just to let you know that you have a messy room. Really, it is telling you, "Clean up your room, please," even though they never said those words. The same is true for the sentence, "I think the trash can is full." Well, yeah, the trash can is full, and this is a direct order for you to take out the trash, even though nobody ever mentioned something along those lines. So we want you to be aware of the, let's say, riddles and secrets that are hidden behind certain sentences. We want you to think twice when a host parent tells you something, if this is what they really want, or if there's a hidden message behind those sentences. So here's a little drawing to show you what we meant with the previous slide. Most of you are probably used to a very direct way of communicating, which you can see on the left-hand side. If your parents want something from you, they will tell you directly. Well, in the English language, because it is more polite, people won't tell you directly. So you will have to start to read between the lines and develop antennas to understand what people really mean with their sentences. Finally, and this is one of the last things we want you to learn in this session, how would we like for you to communicate with us in a later session? Expectations versus reality. You will learn who your local coordinator is and what his or her job is. You need to know. Now, if you have a problem with anything, if you feel like there's a problem that you can't solve, issues at school, there's something going on within your family, really. If you have a problem with anything, we want you to call your local coordinator first. I get it. We all have a tendency to talk to our parents if we have problems, but what will happen if you call your mom or dad at home? Keep that in mind, or at least try to think about it. What will happen if you call them and tell them about your problem first? Here's a little chart to show you why we think it is very important that you talk to your local coordinator first. Obviously, you see, if you have a problem and you talk to your local coordinator first, the message gets to the person it needs to get to directly, right away. Now, the blue arrows show you what's going to happen if you call your parents. Well, think about this. What are your parents going to do if they get a phone call from you saying there's some sort of a problem? Well, needless to say, who are they supposed to talk to? They will call the Spanish office. Then, of course, the Spanish office will call the Canadian staff, and the Canadian staff will talk to the regional director first, who is then handing down the information to your local coordinator again. You can tell that the blue line of communication is much longer. It takes a lot more people to talk with each other. There's a lot more room for translation mistakes, etc., etc. And don't forget, there is a time difference. So again, if you have a problem, the best approach is to talk to your local coordinator directly, because then we can help you right away. So let us tell you what happened in the past when students decided to talk to their parents first instead of their local coordinator. Well, and we're not saying that this is true for you, but some students have the tendency to only tell half of the story. Needless to say, your parents are sad, they're disappointed, and they call the Spanish office. You know, after all communication is through, and usually at the end, the real story comes out, the whole story comes out, your parents are even more disappointed. So why not take the proper line of communication? If you have a problem, try to solve it on your own first. If you need help, call your local coordinator. Don't get your parents involved over here. If they don't need to be involved, you are an adult now, or at least you're trying to become an adult now through this experience. And those are some small steps you can take towards becoming more mature. Congratulations, you made it to the end of your first session. It wasn't so bad, was it? Now, please use the communication quiz link to take your test. You may use the notes you took, but please remember the time limit of the test. You can just take it once. After you finish the test, please continue with the next session, which is called Rules and Regulation.